Hi guys, it's Danny. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that I think is really important and often overlooked, and that is guilt. I'm going to talk a little bit today about my thoughts on guilt, why, most importantly, I think that it's a waste of time, and what I think that we should be doing instead of feeling guilty. So to clarify, before I get into everything, there are a variety of types of guilt. There's guilt that comes from society, guilt that comes sometimes with religion, or beliefs that you were raised with. So there's a variety of different types, but the kind that I'm going to talk about today is guilt related to something that you have done. So think about a time that you made a mistake and you felt guilty, you felt bad about it after the fact. That's the kind of guilt I'm going to be talking about and addressing in this video. Before I get into why I think guilt is a waste of time and what I think that we should be doing instead of feeling guilty, I wanted to talk a little bit first about what guilt is. From what I've researched and also my own personal beliefs is that guilt is about hating yourself, not about hating what you've done. So when you feel guilty, you don't feel necessarily bad about the action itself. You feel bad about yourself as a person. Guilt is you saying to yourself, I did this thing that's bad, and so I'm a bad person. And that is not true. No matter what you've done, your actions don't define you. Obviously, the culmination of your actions over your whole life can make up who you are as a person, but one-time action or something you've done a couple times or mistakes you've made don't define who you are. Guilt is in some ways a form of societal pressure. Now, this can depend a lot on your personal views of what you think is right and what is wrong and what is good and bad. But I think a lot of things are not as clear-cut as we'd like them to be. Guilt is brought on by what society as a whole thinks is good or bad. And that might not always be something that's good or bad. I mean, if you think back in time, some of the things that we considered acceptable in society or unacceptable have changed. You know, slavery used to be acceptable. That is not acceptable, and it should never have been acceptable. It used to be the norm that women didn't vote, and that, now is not acceptable and also should never have been acceptable. Society has rules and regulations and makes up sort of what is right and wrong, for the most part, to help us as humans live together and coexist, but it's not always obvious what's good and bad. And I think, we'll get into this a little bit later, but it's important to figure out what's good and bad for you. And that means stepping away from guilt. Guilt is a form of self-hate, and I don't think that it's beneficial. It is problematic, and it doesn't help the situation. And here's why. First and foremost, guilt does not mean you're a good person. And I think a lot of people confuse that. They will do something and then feel bad about it and then convince themselves that because they feel bad about it, they must be a good person. Feeling good about ourselves doesn't mean that we're good people. It's wrong to associate feeling guilty for something you've done with being a good person. Guilt does not mean you're forgiven. A lot of people carry around guilt with them and don't forgive themselves, and to me, I think this is really pointless because you can't undo what you've done. So what's the point of carrying guilt around with you? Like, to make yourself feel better that you did something bad, to punish yourself? It serves no real practical, useful purpose. And it doesn't mean that you are doing anything positive or trying to create more peace for yourself in your life. And you might think, oh, I've done something terrible. Why should I have peace in my life? Well, just because you made a mistake or you did something wrong doesn't mean that the rest of your life has to be tainted by that mistake. Another really important thing to remember when it comes to guilt is that guilt does not mean you're going to change your behavior. Think about times that you felt guilty, whether it's for something small like, oh, I feel bad that I ate, that whole bag of chips when I only wanted to have a few. Something like that you feel guilty about, but then, a few nights later you'll do the same thing and then you'll feel guilty again. And it's kind of like, what's the point of that guilt? Is it helping you at all? It's not making you change your behavior. So it's only making you feel bad about yourself, which serves no real purpose other than to bring negativity into your life because you're not changing what you're doing. Hopefully you can see from some of these points already that why guilt isn't helpful. But you're probably thinking, okay, well, I did something bad and I don't feel great about it. What do I do? So this is what I think you should do. I think the first and most important thing you can do is figure out what's really going on. Like, is this something that you should actually feel guilty about? Like, it's important to really look inside yourself and really evaluate the situation and think about how you feel about it, because I think that matters. A lot of times we just take what we have heard is good or bad and go with that. And a lot of times that's fine, but it's important to consider, do you really feel bad? Do you really feel in your heart that what you did is wrong? Or do you feel that somebody else is sort of telling you that it's wrong? Also, hand in hand with that is, how do you feel? Do you feel sad, happy, excited, fearful? What are the emotions that come up when you think about what you did? A lot of times it'll be a mix of emotions, but when it is, it's important to weigh which ones seem to be stronger and think about why that might be. That doesn't mean that you should go with that and do it again, but it kind of gives you more insight into how you're feeling and what you want to do going forward. Another thing that you can think about, and this question I think might be the most important, is to answer this question and answer it quickly. So I'm going to ask you a question. So if you have something that you feel guilty about right now, envision it in your head. I'm going to ask you a question. Try to answer it as quickly as you can without thinking too much about it. Okay, ready? Would you do it again? That question can tell you so much if you go with your gut instinct. If your gut instinct is yes, I would, right away, that tells you something. Again, that doesn't mean that you should necessarily do it again, or that you shouldn't feel bad about having done it. It really depends on what it is. But if your immediate reaction to that question was no, I would never do that again, that also tells you something. The next point would be, decide what you want the future to look like. Once you have answered that question and determined how you feel, think about, if you were in that situation again, would you do it? Would you do it if there were certain conditions that were different, maybe? Going back to that silly example about eating too many chips or something like that, like maybe you wouldn't feel as bad if they were healthier chips, or they were like those veggie chips or something, although I don't know if those are even that healthy, but you know what I'm saying. Sort of thinking about that will help you if you are in a situation again, and it will also help you sort of connect with what your beliefs are and what you think is good and bad, and what conditions you're willing to do certain things under. Next point is, instead of focusing on guilt, it's important to focus on regret and forgiveness. So the difference between regret and guilt is focused on hating yourself because of an action. So if you do something bad, you feel bad about yourself as a person. Like inside, you're like, I am a bad person. Whereas regret is, I wish I hadn't done that thing. I am still a good person, but I did a bad thing. So regret is what you want to focus on, not guilt. And once you've sort of worked through the regret and realized that you are still a good person and you may have made a mistake, that's when you can move on towards forgiveness. And it's really, really important to forgive yourself, no matter what you've done. Don't feel like forgiving yourself means you're a bad person, or that, if you're offering yourself forgiveness, that you don't deserve it, because I think everybody does. And I think the world would be a lot better place if we all forgave ourselves for our mistakes, because let's face it, we all make them. Every single one of us has made or will make mistakes. We move on, and you have to keep living, and you can't keep dragging that around, because it's really going to weigh you down for the rest of your life, and nobody wants that. Next thing is to make amends. And this depends a great deal on the situation, how you define what you want to do going forward. If it was a one-time thing that you did and you feel like it would be the right thing to do to apologize to a person if you've hurt somebody else, or even, hurt yourself, to make amends with yourself, then that is something that you should definitely do, because it can feel really good, and it can feel like a kind of closure to put things out into the open and to be honest. There are times when this either won't be appropriate or it won't be necessary. Like if you're going to continue making the same mistakes, there's no point in apologizing for them. But In those cases, I think it's really important to focus on acceptance. Maybe you hurt somebody years ago and you're still carrying it around and you don't talk to that person, and it would be super weird to call them up and say you're sorry, although you can totally do that. Or maybe the person's no longer alive or something and you feel regretful of something you did and there's literally no way to apologize or make amends. At that point, I really think you've got to try to cultivate acceptance in your life and say that you're doing the best you can, you're moving forward positively, and you're going to make different choices going forward. And even though you can't have a verbal or written sign of forgiveness from somebody else, you can envision that they forgive you because you are truly sorry. Last point, and one of the most important points, is to look at the big picture. It's important to remember that you are not your mistakes. You are not the one thing you did that time, or even the thing that you did a couple times. You are a full, complete person that has good traits and bad traits, that's done amazing things and that's done not so great things. We all are like that. So I think focusing on the big picture can really help you if you are feeling guilt, and remind you that you are so much more than just something you've done. When you do this, I think it really adds a lot of goodness back to the world, because if you start feeling guilty about stuff and you start thinking, I'm such a bad person, and remember, guilt is about hating yourself, not about hating the actions. So let's say you're focusing on guilt and not on regret, and you're thinking, God, I'm a terrible person, like I do all these bad things. That's going to get into your mind the more you say that and the more you tell yourself that, and you're going to really start to believe it. You're going to start to think, I'm a bad person. You might already feel that way if you've made some mistakes and you've been carrying around some guilt. And the thing about that is, if you really believe in your heart that you're bad, what's to stop you from doing really bad things? Like, if you start to firmly believe and it becomes part of your belief system that you're a bad person, it's going to be so much easier and so much more tempting to just do bad things all the time, to make new mistakes or to make the same one over and over again, because why not? You're a bad person, or so you tell yourself. And that obviously is not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for the people around you. It's not going to be good for society in general. And that, to me, is one of the most important reasons why we have to let go of guilt. Focusing on the action, not on yourself, and also focusing on creating more forgiveness in our lives for ourselves and also for those who have hurt us as well. Because the more you carry around guilt or anger or hatred, the harder it's going to be to be a good person. And as you guys know, what we need more of in this world is good people doing good things, not people who are feeling terrible about themselves because they did something bad. Whether you're feeling guilty now or not, or you're, experience it in the future, I hope that this video helped in some way and makes sense. I know not everybody writes about it or talks about it this way, and this is my personal belief in the fact that guilt is not useful and there are other ways to deal with making mistakes. But I would love to hear your feedback in the comments below, or you can reach out to me on social media and let me know what you think about guilt. And as always, if there are any other topics you want me to talk about, just leave a comment in the comment section below. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!